And we are live.
Well, the hour has come. So welcome to everybody who has come to COZ this evening, the conversation on Zoom. Today we have a very important session that everybody everybody has had to experience something completely unlike any other year. So I have pleasure in introducing this session curated by the European Cantors Association. And it's my pleasure to introduce Russell Grossman, who is a key member of the executive of the European Cantors Association. He presented the program at the European Cantors Convention in Hanover last year. He has been he trained at Jews College, and he's been a chazan at High Holidays for nearly 40 years. The last several years at Giffnock Synagogue, which is the largest synagogue in Scotland. So my pleasure to introduce Russell.
Okay, thank you very much, Geraldine, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. One of the wonders of Zoom technology allows us to connect irrespective of time boundaries.
Just as fast as the washing machine flooding.
And just before the washing machine does, in fact, go all over the floor, I think we're going to ask whoever has that particular difficulty maybe to mute themselves and maybe just, if there is a need. This year certainly was definitely an interesting year in Giffnock. Certainly it was one to be remembered, but not necessarily for the right reasons. But what we really want to hear from our panelists from earlier in the year, in September, when we said, well, what does the High Holidays look like it's going to be for you, and to hear their individual experiences. And we have a panel, a glitterati of a panel actually, and I'm not going to go through the panel individually, but I am going to ask each of the panelists to please introduce themselves when I introduce them. Now, we have lined up, in fact, a total of 16 questions for our panelists to choose from. These are the questions that hopefully you can see on the screen. And of the 16, the top 3 are the ones that we want all the panelists to address in some way. Was it a meaningful experience? What was the biggest winner and the biggest loser for you this year? And what are the implications for the employment of full-time or high holidays cantors as a result of this? And then, as you can see, a number of other more detailed questions that each of them may wish to address depending on their own personal experiences. And it was definitely a personal experience, as I said, I think for all of us in some way or other. So without further ado, in no particular order, I'm going to ask Cantor Benny Rogodzynski if he would perhaps go first. Firstly, Benny, if you would be happy to introduce yourself and then to explain, how was it for you, the High Holidays? You'll need to unmute yourself, Benny, first. That's great.
Russell, thank you very much. For us, it's just gone good afternoon, so thank you. It's great to be again part of this program. And I want to thank at the beginning the European Cantors Association for hosting this. I think it's most valuable. People talk often about the demise of Chazanut and the fact that you only can look to the cantor of yesteryear for the great cantors, but I believe there is a great future in Chazanut, and so it's wonderful to come on these symposiums because they give us cantors around the world a lot of hope for the future and the vitality of our trade, for lack of a better word. I'm a cantor alongside a very well-known cantor, Yitzchak Meir Helfgat, at Park East Synagogue on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And I've been with the shul just past 12 years. My roots come from England, from Liverpool. And that's what I could say. I'm very passionate about Chazanut and about this program, Russell.
Thank you, Benny. And perhaps you'd like to continue with your view on answering the questions that we've put.
Right. So what I would say at the outset is that this was the very best year we've ever had and the very worst year we've ever had, all at one time. And what I mean by that is we were particularly hard hit in Manhattan. It's a dense population. People live in apartment buildings or flats, as we used to call them in England. And unfortunately, many of our congregation suffered. Many people are not here anymore as a result of this pandemic. And so there was a tremendous fear. And even though the governor in our state had allowed many more people to come to services, the fear kept a lot of people away. So ultimately, we had in the main service, where you could usually see anywhere from 900 to 1,000 people, at the highlight, which was Kol Nidre, Yizkor, and Ne'ilah, we didn't have more than 100 to 110 people. So first, the visual, when you walk into shul, was one that was very stark and difficult for people to digest. You know, where is everyone? Where is our families? Where are people that we wait to see, especially for those who don't frequent every Shabbat? That was a significant challenge. Second, everybody's wearing masks. In some cases, you can't even recognize who the people are, because if you're sitting far from them, you're not sure who's actually there and who's not there. We did not have a choir, which is such an important part of our service, but the board voted to not have the choir on the high holidays. And the services were abridged. So when usually a member would show up, if a service started at 8, they'd show up at 10:30, 11. Here, if you showed up after 2 hours, the services were over. That means you had to show up on time. The entire service, top to bottom, didn't last more than 120 minutes, sometimes even shorter than that. But so that was the challenging part. The inspirational part came in as much as the 100 or so people that came could not have been more effusive in their praise and thanks and in their feelings of inspiration at the service. When you lead a service as a cantor, you don't necessarily always feel that inspired. There are times that you feel better and times that you feel worse. In these services, both myself and I know I could speak for Cantor Helfgott, we were so moved. It wasn't even by the words of the prayer that we were singing. It's by looking out at the congregation and looking at people who took risks to show up to the davening. Family members, older people, younger people, sometimes a family, one member representing the entire family for Yizkor. And so my takeaway from the entire Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur service is, it was, under the circumstances, a very emotional experience for people. And even those who could not come to the service. And for example, we have an 89-year-old Holocaust survivor who lives across the street from the shul. And we generally only see her on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And on Yom Kippur, when we had the break, she was sitting outside as I walked out. And I said to her, Andrea, why weren't you in shul? And she said, I'm too scared to come to shul. I simply sat outside to be inspired by those who are coming in and out of the door. And to me, that really was the story of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It was about those who could open the doors and show up, but also about those who were at home, inspired by the services that we were conducting.
And thank you, Benny. And could you tell me, what is your view, going back to the questions that we were putting up earlier, what's your view overall about what this might mean for the employment of full-time or high holidays cantors in the future? What do you think? What do you think, if anything, this has changed?
So if you had asked me this question in March or April, around Pesach time, I thought that this was going to be absolutely devastating for the cantorial trade. I thought that people would not, boards of synagogues would hesitate to hire cantors, and that members would just say, you know, we're living in a new age, and this would be a good excuse for some to get rid of that part of the budget. However, today, towards the end of November, I feel very differently. I think that in many ways, the role of the cantor has been elevated. Yes, cantors are it's going to be different. Even once the pandemic is over, I don't think we go back to the days of sitting in shul for 3 to 4 hours on a Shabbat. I don't see it, certainly not in my shul. But the role of the chazan and the inspiration that the chazan or chazanit can give in a synagogue, I think is absolutely magnified. And In addition, I think there is a new appreciation for what the Chazan does. You know, ironically, the very best part of the entire pandemic and wearing masks is that in our shul, people were not schmoozing on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. There was no talking because you're sitting with the mask and you have to sit socially distant. That's the part that I actually would want to incorporate moving forward. So you had a silent congregation. And while it was a challenge for hearing them join in the music, it was great because they were engaged in the prayers. And that part I really see as something positive. And I do believe, I'm very hopeful that at least in the United States, cantorial music will continue to flourish for many years to come.
Thank you. That was certainly my experience in Glasgow, that people were coming up and saying that they enjoyed the service for that reason. I've got a question from Marsha to you. Were you wearing a mask for the entire service?
So in our shul, the dispensation was that the cantors had to get tested 24 hours before Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Thank God we all came back negative, and we did not wear masks. However, when we turned around to the congregation, which happened at a few points, or when we did Vanachnu Korim, or in Ne'ilah, when someone was standing in front of us for opening of the Ark, we did put on our masks. But other than that, we were the only ones in the congregation that were davening without masks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I know we were in a box on the bima, surrounded by perspex, and it was without masks on. But it was only afterwards that I realized that on taking over from the Baal Shachris, I was effectively inhaling any virus that the Baal Shachris had put into that box. Fortunately, I only realized that until later on. We're going to move on, and we'll come back to general questions at the end. We're going to move on now to Eric. Eric Moses from Beth Shalom in Toronto. Hi, Eric. Thank you very much for joining us. You are at, I think, 12 minutes past noon there in Toronto. Thank you.
I am still part of the Commonwealth.
That's great. Thank you. Are your roadworks outside Beth Shalom still going on?
Yes, many roadworks.
So I don't know if you joined us a little, just a little bit out after the hour, but we were going to ask everybody to take a pick list of questions, but especially to answer the questions 1, 2, and 3. Was it a meaningful experience? What was the biggest winner and the biggest loser for you this year? And the implications, in your view, for the employment of full-time or high holidays cantors. So your thoughts, Eric?
So thank you, and thank you for having me on the panel and for the illuminating questions. Thank you, Benny, for your insights. And we come at it from a very, not very, but slightly different angle in Toronto. Toronto is a unique community in that the conservative movement still straddles the traditional side more than the liberal side, whereas I think in the US, things have shifted progressively to the left. Toronto had a tough threshold to cross this year, and my fear is that by crossing that threshold this year, it will be hard to go back to what historically was a very traditional conservative movement model. And I say that there were last minute holdouts. There were synagogues. There are synagogues in town, by example, that still don't have, in the conservative world where it's quite common to have an egalitarian service, there are synagogues in the conservative world in Toronto still that do not have that offering. So for them to go from where they are today to where they were a year ago was a pretty big step. And I say that in that, some synagogues were pioneers in the broadcasting of services. Others were very late to hop on that bandwagon. And I mean, 6 months into the pandemic, they were just starting to explore the idea philosophically of having a Zoom minion or even a Zoom live broadcast via YouTube. All that to preface my answer to some of the following questions, which Geraldine and Russell had posed prior to this moment. So I will address them all. My first feeling is that human nature is to take the path of least resistance. And my fear with that is by making synagogue so accessible in such an easy way, I'm worried that people will expect it to always be that way. And I feel that there's this requirement for some tension in order for the experience to be meaningful. Yes, I had people say to me, yeah, we sat on the dock of our cottage while Kol Nidre, best Kol Nidre ever. Once, maybe. If you had to do that twice and year after year, the novelty factor, I fear, will dissipate. So that's my first point. Point number two, the congregational experience was very positive. And why was it very positive? Because people saw us do things that we're not accustomed to doing. They saw the chazan's face. Why? Because I daven facing Mizrach and the people are behind me, but they happened to put a camera that was literally in my face so people could see the tangible expressions on my face. I felt personally it was an intrusion, but I couldn't avoid having that experience. So there were multiple camera angles and there was a sound engineer that was manipulating what was happening with the cameras. So notwithstanding, people got to see that. Now, from the rabbi side of the bima, I think that's a benefit because the rabbi is having one-way communication with the congregation. However, a chazan, and I preface as well by saying there were 60 people in the room. I think Benny said he had about 100 or so. We had 60 at the peak. So on Yom Kippur, of a congregation of 1,000 families, where that translates roughly into 3,000 people in the building at once. The experience for a chazan to daven to a camera, effectively with 60 congregants, is a communal experience. When the rabbi speaks, he's a winner because he has everybody's undivided attention, be it that they're in front of him on a camera or they're in front of him in the congregation. When a chazan is davening and there is no congregation to share that experience with, something is inevitably lost. You need the give and take. Congregation is part of the davening. The davening is a communal experience. One of the things that I did not like to hear from congregants was we loved shul hopping on Kol Nidre night. What does that mean? They went from this website to that website to the next website. Little did they realize that some synagogues invested upwards of $250,000 in producing their events. Others did nothing. They literally turned on a camera and they got whatever was happening live in the moment. So the disparity of that, again, was not, forgetting that it's not a level playing field, it's also at some levels, it loses some of its, it becomes somewhat disingenuous if you're watching a pre-recorded broadcast of something which is really supposed to cover the essence of the moment. Let me just go through my quick list here, because I did make. I go back to one thing. Davening is not a passive listening experience. It cannot be that we only give highlights of a davening, because if you only go from Hineni to Unetane Tokef to Ochila Lakel to Aleinu to some big piece in Zichronot and something in Shofarot and then the Hasidic Kaddish, that is not a davening. That is a religious moments concert that gave up everything that happens in between, and you basically gave all the sugar, but somewhere you lost the coffee inside. And you need the whole package, and I've tried to convey this to my leadership as well, that davening requires all of those elements in order for it to have a form, otherwise it's formless. My fear moving forward is that we've now set a precedent. There are many people that can't come to shul. They're infirm, they're sick, they're elderly, they can't get there. But there are many that can. And my fear is that the future expectation will be that if you can't come, well, I can watch it online. But that's not what a Beit Knesset is. A Beit Knesset is a house of gathering, is a place for people to be communally together. And one of the questions was, how did it impact the youth? Well, how many kids, truthfully, sat with their parents in front of a computer screen or a TV and watched the davening and felt like it was Rosh Hashanah? I maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I think they were the losers in this experience. And I hope that this is not a long-term solution to communal davening, because you need to bring families into the building. They need to feel that moment of getting dressed up and coming with their father and playing with the tzitzit, that they're sitting there, whether they're bored or not bored, they by osmosis absorb the smells, the sounds, the feeling of the holidays. Musically speaking, I had a socially distanced quartet that participated with me. It was wonderful to have them. Again, it was to me a bit of a concert and not as much a davening as I would have liked. But notwithstanding, the congregants were euphoric in that they appreciated the efforts that we put forth. I'll go to a few other areas, and one of the biggest winners of the holidays was shofar blowings in parks. So at the conclusion of davening on second day, which was Sunday, the rabbi and I each went to 3 parks in the neighborhood. We went to different parks to divide and conquer, and incredible. It reminded me of the movie A Field of Dreams. You could see people, from meters away walking to the public park. Even though we weren't encouraging public gatherings, there was this broadcast that we were going to have shofar blowings publicly in a park, and people were coming for this incredible moment just to hear the shofar blowing live. Families, kids, adults, grandparents. It was a very nice moment to see that, and it happened at each park, 100, 150 people showing up. I think that is a positive thing, and that is something that may continue on in the future. That should, however, not replace a person's thinking that you have to come to shul to hear the shofar blowing on Rosh Hashanah. And again, I go back to my first comment, human nature is to take the path of least resistance, and we don't want it to become so easy that people will choose the easiest path. Finally, stepping outside of my box and my personal comfort zone has actually had the inverse effect that some would have thought. Sometimes you think if you cross the line to something that's easy, you'll tend to say, well, this is easy and I'd like to do it more. As a result of my experience, I'd actually like to do it less. And it reminds me how important our traditions are to keeping our faith and to continue adhering to them. And lastly, as clergy, we can't let the tail wag the dog. We need to continue leading our balabatim so that they know that we're establishing the paradigm for tradition, and we can't let it evolve too much out of our control. So thank you.
Thank you, Eric. A huge amount there, and incredible insight. I particularly note 2 things that you said. The first is this concept, in a sense, that kavanah is something that needs to be shared with the congregation, and it's the feedback that you get, which is part of the davening experience. And obviously, you need people in shul for that. The other was your observation that people in front of a television screen. It may have been a novelty one year, but are they going to come to shul again? I've heard people say to me that attending a funeral by Zoom is much more efficient than having to turn up to the ground. But in fact, they seem to have lost the main element of giving Menachem Oval at the actual grounds themselves. So thank you very much for that. We'll hold a number of the other points for questions later that you raised, because I want to move on now to Marsha. Marsha, is it Dubrov or Dubrow? And how does it sound with your mute off? Dubrow. Okay, Marsha, so welcome. Thank you for joining us. You're joining us, I think, from Florida, is that correct?
Right.
Would you like to introduce yourself and then again your view on the questions that we were putting?
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this experience. I think it's really important to have this kind of debrief, because we have a very wide range of cantorial, professional expertise as well as experience here. And I think that that's very important, because each of us kind of represents the panoply of cantors that are out there, across the spectrum, across the pond, etc. So I wanted to start by saying, first off, that what I'm going to share with you today is a little different from what we've heard thus far, because my experience is one of, at present, serving as a high holiday cantor. And I think it had really important implications for how things went, because I'm also a rabbi. And I served the clergy has been a second career for me, but I served for 12 years a conservative congregation in Jersey City, New Jersey. And I stepped down emerita from that position about 4 years ago. And I moved to Florida 2 years later. So in the interim, I was doing life cycle events and also serving as a high holy day freelancer, if you will. When I moved to Florida, I had made the decision that I did not want to commit to a full-time pulpit. And this particular year, the year of COVID, I ended up serving a congregation about a half hour away from where I reside. Now that congregation, and I have no problem, and I'm sure they would have no problem sharing with you the name of the congregation, it's Temple B'nai Jacob of Wellington. Now, I think what I'm going to talk about really is a reflection of congregations that have under 250 members, so that you can kind of get that perspective, which differs from what we've heard so far. To begin with, they did not really know what they were going to do for the high holy days, because they were still waiting to see what was going to happen with COVID and whether in fact they were going to be able to use the community center in Wellington, which of course would have made it accommodate many, many more people in the sanctuary, irrespective of whether they wanted to do a hybrid version or what. So the consequence of that was that as someone who was applying for this position, it became very difficult and frustrating, because they first requested an interview with me in April, but that didn't culminate until well into August, by which point I was already not, I honestly, it didn't matter to me. I wasn't desperate to have a pulpit or anything like that. But I think it's important to note that if this kind of situation were to manifest in the future, I think smaller congregations may have benefited from this experience because they'd have their act together. Having said that, I was also in a situation with a rabbi who did not have any experience leading high holy day services. And I, of course, had been leading them for 12 years. So the dynamics on the bima was also challenging, because the board wanted me to feel free to speak at any time during the services. Okay, now the mechanics. Once they decided that the community center was not going to be available, the board made the decision that it would be a hybrid service, that they would permit certain people, older people, if they wanted, middle-aged people, to come in with their children if they were over 12 years old to the sanctuary, but with social distancing and masks. One of the questions was about the Gabaim and also the Torah readers. The Gabaim and the Torah readers were in the sanctuary. They were all in the sanctuary, but they never came up to the bima. They stood in place, as it were. And it was also a little cumbersome for me because, number one, I had to wear a mask for the entire time I was singing. And that was very challenging because it's hard to get into a spiritual space when you're worried about whether your mask is slipping and having to fuss with the mask, and to say nothing of the difficulty of actually singing with a mask on for a very sustained period of time. So I would have to say, and I also had a plexiglass, three-sided plexiglass barrier, clear barrier on my pulpit, as did the rabbi. And the rabbi took out the Torah and put it on the reading desk, and he followed along as each of these people doing the aliyot, chanting the aliyot, would stand up. So that was all standing in place. I thought it worked very well. The people on Zoom, I noticed, because our setup was to have one computer, one laptop in the back of the sanctuary, or like midway in the sanctuary, and one for a long view. And then each of us, the rabbi and the cantor, had our laptop up. So just on the matter of the mechanics and the logistics, again, as somebody who was not used to this congregation, to the context, to who these people are, etc., I found that there was a lot that had not been planned or thought through. Like the actual planning of the services, I ended up sort of leading the team on the services, which they were insistent, and I was happy for that we adopt the Rabbinical Assembly's proposals for the progress of the individual services. And it worked out very well. I suggested that we put the Yizkor service in a different place, which we did. And that also worked out well for keeping people on Zoom, because it was placed before the Avoda service rather than during the Torah service. Just by way of summary on the services, the only service that I thought was too long was the Yom Kippur service, which was pushing 4 hours. I mean, it was at least 3 hours, maybe 3.5. And, you know, trying to sing for that period of time and to do a really good job was indeed very challenging. Plus, this congregation, although they were not educated about Nusach, they knew the word Nusach, and and I'm fine with that. They were insistent that I, you know, have a rigorous service from a Nusach perspective. And I was fine with that, but I'm not sure that that was the way to hold the so-called audience, the congregants who are Zooming. So there's a little bit of interlacing of the issue of how are you proceeding on the services with how do you sustain keeping two different types of audiences, if you will, engaged. So
Marsha, thanks very much for that. That's a really comprehensive view on how was it. Looking to the future, what did you think, if at all, this has changed in terms of employment of high holiday cantors?
Okay, so I don't really see that this has much of an impact in terms of expanding it, reducing it, etc., because really it's a unique service, the High Holy Days, and if it proceeds on Zoom, you're still going to need someone who can be chanting the service. I don't see that they would put their resources, let's just talk about financial resources, that a congregation would necessarily put their financial resources into technology. Again, I'm speaking only to congregations under 250 members, that they would put their resources toward technology rather than having a chazan. So my own feeling about that is that it's simply a toss-up, dependent on the board, the individual board. I don't think you can draw conclusions about that in a generalizing way.
There we go. Thanks very much for that. Thank you. So just moving on, and again, we'll take some questions at the end. I just want to take actually next Albie Chait, who's just been able to join us for just a very short time. Albi, I'm really appreciative that you've been able to join us at all. And I know particularly that for you, because I've been kind of following your progress, as it were, particularly for you, High Holidays were very different at the UHC in Leeds. So we're kind of going through a list of questions, which I appreciate you may not previously have seen, but here are the questions. There are the questions that we've been asking people, but particularly we wanted to address the top 3 of these questions. Was it a meaningful experience? What was the biggest winner and the biggest loser for you this year? And what are the implications in your view for the employment of full-time high holiday cantors? So thank you again for joining us. Over to you.
Miss Lee, thank you so much for having me. And can I just say, you guys are unbelievable. And I'm just really didn't want to miss it. So to find even a little bit of time, I just absolutely wanted to be with you, if I may. I'll speak about perhaps my own experience, and as a result, my own experience in relation to how I personally feel things are, think things are. Can I just say good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everybody, wherever you're joining us from. I can see the sun is out for some of you. It's absolutely awful weather here in Leeds. So wherever you are, if it's sunny, enjoy it, and if it's not, it can't be worse than Leeds. So there you go. From my perspective, I have to tell you, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur was, albeit different, unbelievable, in the most positive, enriching. It couldn't have felt more together, albeit from a virtual sense, limited services, but I've never felt so close to my congregation. I think when something that touches on people's vulnerability happens in the public domain, certainly in this instance, from a world sense, I think people have felt relationship to Judaism in a different way, maybe than they've ever felt before. And Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur became an absolute catalyst or epicenter of direction towards something more powerful than themselves. I think when people's immortality gets questioned, or people's perspective on these things gets questioned, they turn to something more powerful than themselves. And the fact that Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur was absolutely in the middle of all this, I think was a very unique moment where Judaism became such. Listen, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is very important all year round, but specifically on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, that time where people reconnect in a way. But this year, I felt people connected more than ever. Now, my experience of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur this year was very unique. We had virtual services, we had physical services inside the building, and we had physical services outside the building. I can describe the outside service as something like Glastonbury. For anybody who's not sure what Glastonbury is, it's like some sort of crazy festival. We hired, I think it was 550 pedestrian fences. We enclosed people safely. We had to hold 3 services. It was that busy. We had a stage so high that I felt like a rock star for the first time in my entire life, which was a very nice experience, actually. But it was unbelievable. Even those that came for the 45-minute service that we ran outside, people came away with such a sense of connection to their faith, perhaps more of a connection than they may feel otherwise. I have to say that genuinely, people felt different this year than maybe they felt normally. People turn up to shul in a normal sense. It's about what people wear. It's about what people say, who they sit next to, what seat they're given or whatever, where the children's service takes place. This year was very family orientated. Family were sat together. They were mixed, and this is an Orthodox sense because we were, of course, outside, and it was more of a highlight service, not necessarily a religious, formal davening in that sense. Indoors, we had a number of services that took place for limited numbers. In our synagogue, because of the size, we could house around 140 per service. And that was very unique. I have to say, Ne'ilah this year was like something I've never experienced in my entire life. And that's in comparison to a shul of 1,000 people normally. So very different in number, but very, very unique. The thing for me that really comes onto perhaps the last question that, Russell, that you bring, and that is the online services were off the scale in terms of numbers. I reckon through our our social media platform and other platforms that we stream to, I reckon we touched 20,000 viewers over Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Now, if you put that in comparison to our normal numbers, this is absolutely crazy. And as I said in the last time that we spoke, I wanted to do things so different that people next year would remember that the coronavirus year was something different, but good different. So this year, of course, different to what an Orthodox synagogue would normally have, we conducted our virtual service of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur with a string quartet and piano. Everything was written out fresh. Never been arranged like this before. It was very different. We had an arranger called Dr. Ian Sapiro, who's a member of our choir. He's also the doctor of the University of Leeds, the music department. Some of you may have heard of him before. Together, we wrote out probably 9 pieces for Rosh Hashanah and around 9 or 10 pieces for Yom Kippur. And the uptake of people was unbelievable. To reach that amount of viewers was crazy. I mean, Rosh Hashanah we did a little bit before Shabbat came in. It was Shabbat and Rosh Hashanah. Yom Kippur I decided to do Saturday night. I felt very strongly, and other shuls perhaps did a little different to what we did. They did Erev Yom Kippur, Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon. I felt Sunday afternoon was never going to work. I mean, the last thing I want to do on Sunday afternoon when I'm fasting for 25 hours is sit watching a service for an hour and a half or 2 hours. I felt Saturday night, where it's dark and it's late and people have less pressure, I felt was more appropriate. And for us, thank God, I don't know about others, for us it really worked. And you had that emotional feeling. It's dark. It was you sort of had the view of the synagogue that you would normally have on the night of Kol Nidre, and it was very special, really special. I have to say, from my perspective, Rosh Hashanah was difficult to sing virtually. It was a very weird experience, but Yom Kippur, Kol Nidre, the Saturday night before Kol Nidre, was for me a very, very uplifting experience. And we've had so many messages of people saying, well, this should be just a regular thing. The night before Yom Kippur, that we should offer a musical presentation that people can either A, get in the mood, B, engage if they're not able to engage, if they're housebound or whatever it may be. And I can see it being, certainly from our perspective, a regular item on the agenda. Relating to the last question that you put before me just now, how perhaps this High Holy Days, or perhaps the pandemic in general, is affecting Cantor, part-time, full-time, synagogue, and so on and so forth. I have to say this, I carry a dual role in my synagogue. I'm not just the chazan, I'm also the rabbi as well. The desire to hear me give shiurim and the desire for me to give talks, lectures, and sermons is in by no means in relation to the desire for people to have musical services online. I think, perhaps contrary to others, I think that this pandemic, that I wish would never have happened, but albeit, I think this has been the greatest opportunity for cantors, for chazanim, to show an engagement of service, of music, of relationship to faith and prayer and practice than perhaps we've ever had before. When have we ever had an opportunity to engage so many people through music and prayer? Never before. I've never in my life had a situation where people, thousands of people on a weekly basis, want to engage in our services. I've never had such a thing. If we, a lot of people tell, I won't say a porky, but a lot of people tell a half-hearted answer to how many they really get on Shabbat morning. My numbers are this: if in the winter period, if we get 20 or 30 on a Friday night, it's a miracle. If we get 30 to 50 on a summer, it's like the equivalent of Moses splitting the sea. On a Shabbat morning, we get, on a fantastic Shabbat with a big bar mitzvah, 200 to 300 if and it's a very vibrant synagogue. But our numbers are our numbers. There's in no way we would have been able to touch the people that we've touched, the amount of people that we've touched at any other point in my time, certainly in recent times. And we've been able to do that through song and through prayer and through appreciation for this wonderful art of cantorial music and mixing it with a modern twist as well. And I think it's been a very unique moment that will serve cantors in general in fantastically good stead for the future. I think people have realized over the last 6 months how important music is, Jewish music is, and how engaging it can be. And I see a very bright future for cantorial music. And I say cantorial music, I include all religious prayer, however modern or traditional that may be.
That's a fascinating approach to that, Albie. And actually, I think one of the reasons you gave a number of reasons why you thought that was the case. I think one of the reasons actually is also your infectious approach to all of this, if I may say so. I've tuned into a number of your Kabbalah Shabbos events, if I can put it that way, and I also tuned into the Saturday night with the string quartet for Kol Nidre, and it was actually quite a different and moving experience. Am I also correct in also saying that you've had the advantage in being able to have sponsorship from individual members of your congregation that have enabled you to do this, or actually almost technologically from scratch?
So the way it worked at the beginning of the pandemic was, I'm a big believer in not just simply reaching out. We need money. We need money. We need money. We made as a synagogue. I made a decision as a synagogue that for the first 4, 5, 6 weeks of the pandemic, we simply put this together, knowing that potentially at some point people would engage enough that they would feel close enough to it that they want to support it. And as a result, it's really snowballed from there. We always made the decision that whoever sponsored it, we'd make a fuss of them. I would get in touch with them. What's their favorite music? What music do they like? If it's an anniversary, what sang at your wedding? Or what's your favorite? What was your first song at your first dance? And try and include something about them that hopefully people will watch and think, well, I want that to be me. I want to support next week's. And then that can be about my birthday or my celebration or my Yortzeit or whatever it is. And something, dare I say, that was the turning point for our Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur service was I got people to explain every single piece that we performed, but I got children, I got older people, younger people, young professionals. And we've said this many a time in many a conference that I've been to, that engaging congregants, certainly engaging children, the support that people have, uncles, aunts, grandmas, mums, dads, or whatever, to hear those people take part. And in actual fact, some of those kids will never, ever, ever forget they took part in a virtual service at a time where such a thing would never happen before. And the buy-in was amazing. And we very recently just started to have dollar services on a Saturday night. And it's a bit more like the generation game. It's a bit less musical, but we're just trying to find different ways to engage people, to show people. Most people have never heard of Havdalah before. They've never seen Havdalah before. They've never heard the musical side of Havdalah before. And to be able to throw in more music, more Jewish music, more cantorial things, we're, dare I say, also giving people an element of education so that when we all come back to synagogue, they're connected. I cannot wait till we hold our first Kabbalat Shabbat service for real. I think people will be excited to come back because they've experienced it. And this is just my personal opinion. Everybody can agree or disagree. I think this has been a huge opportunity to show everyone what cantorial music is about and how it's more current now than any time before.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Albie, for that, and thank you for sharing those with us. And somebody saying in the chat that this is a silver lining, perhaps, to this terrible virus. I know that you need to move on, and thank you very much. Obviously, stay if you can, but I know that you've made time out of a very busy day to do this, and thank you very much for that. Just noting that there's a lot of going on in the chat. I'm not making a lot of reference to it just because we want to hear from all our panelists. I do just want to recognize, though, a comment from Cantor Stephen Robbins, in fact, one of my teachers, who says that, you know, he's been a cantor for 50 years, but this year, not having a synagogue, davened with 6 in the garden. And I'm sure that was a special experience, as well, if perhaps a little bit unique. I'm going to move now to Laurie Black. Laurie is in the US. Laurie, apologies, I can't remember exactly where in the US you are, and it's not obvious, I don't think, from the room that you're sat in. But please introduce yourselves.
Certainly. Hi, everybody. I'm Laurie Black. I'm usually just messing around in the chat on these sessions, so it is exciting to speak to all of you, and thank you for letting me be part of this panel. I'm coming to you from LA in the San Fernando Valley, if any of you know it. And the synagogue that I was directing High Holidays for this year It was Temple Emmanuel of Beverly Hills, a Reformed synagogue. I think one of the largest, if not the largest, in Beverly Hills, in that region of LA, and one of the more prominent synagogues in Los Angeles. I imagine I'll probably have a slightly different take on some of this, just because I am not a cantor, nor am I a rabbi. My parents continue to ask me why not, but here I am. My focus is largely musical on the production side, but what's interesting for me is being the musical head and still getting to be a part of all the conversations that we're discussing, how to best engage with our congregants and stuff like that. The onus is often on me to try to answer that through our musical practice. Just thinking a little bit about our experience, I think one of the unique things that we had at Temple Emmanuel of Beverly Hills is that, and I should say that I identify as a conservative Jew, but I live in the Reformed Jewish world. I work almost exclusively at Reformed synagogues, so that's just know where the perspective is coming from. But what was really unique in our experience is that Temple Emmanuel of Beverly Hills was incredibly well set up already to do online services in a variety of ways. It is a synagogue. The cantor and rabbi that I work with, Rabbi Jonathan Aaron and cantor Lizzie Weiss, are very in tune to their congregants' needs. And the idea of a live stream service was certainly not something unusual for them. In fact, when most services were getting, will live stream service for the 1 or 2 people that can't come in, they already had a very significant online presence, both on the live streaming side of things, as well as in social media and what have you. So there was already this really great foundation for us to work off of. And so while the task of creating the high holidays was incredibly daunting, as I think it was for all of us, we had an infrastructure to work with. And being Beverly Hills, we also had some incredible resources, like one of the board members who is a TV producer who wanted to assist with the high holidays. So, I mean, we had a lot of resources at our disposal. And I would say that because unlike several of the individuals that have spoken before, and I have to say that, it's so wonderful to be on such an esteemed panel of colleagues. It's really exciting. The in-person services were a non-starter, due to various regulations related to the state of California, concerns related to the congregants at the synagogue. There wasn't even a discussion of how are we going to do in-person services. There was a short discussion of, well, do we have 10 to 20 people as like the VIPs who can come? And so there were a couple people in the congregation, but nothing of like a substantial number. And so the focus was really, really on how do we make the video that people are engaging with very make it feel organic, make it feel like a real service. And so I should say that these decisions were not made quickly. In fact, I would say that we had to, I know that we added at least 3 days of shooting, because so everything was, I should say, pre-filmed, and we had a professional vocal quartet. The vocal quartet was pre-recorded in a recording studio in isolation booths. I was standing in the middle with mask and visor and all the fun stuff. And then after the recording, and I should say we've created an album of this, we were lucky enough to lay down 19 tracks that the synagogue had wanted to do for years. And so we took advantage and made a real album. After we did this, the singers came in and lip synced in the synagogue in, a socially distanced, safe way. And every decision from where to put the cameras, to what time of day to shoot so the light is coming in right, to what songs do we choose, as we always do, were really made with a couple questions in mind. One being, well, how does this connect to our congregants? This is not the year, say, to try some new, really, some piece that's really going to challenge our listeners, when we know that they want to connect to the music that they have known at Temple Emmanuel for this long. So we spent a lot of time, digging in and making those decisions so it felt like an organic experience. In the videos, we spent time bringing in different families individually to do some of the aliyot and hakafot and things that we would normally have in a service, and do them individually so it could still be incorporated in. And the individuals who were watching still felt like they were connecting with their community. Because I think if you were to ask me the biggest thing, one of the questions that we're addressing is, who are the winners and losers? I would argue that in our services, that there were many, many winners, that the services went off very cleanly, that congregants felt like they were really able to engage with the service, having text on the screen, having page number for the machzor on the screen. All of these things were put in place so you could engage with the service. I would argue that, I don't want to say it's a loser, but a difficulty that needed to be overcome, and pardon me, that I think we are still wrestling with, is how do the congregants feel like they're interacting with each other? Because interacting with the music, interacting with the service was something that at least I felt was executed quite well. Interacting with each other and interacting with the congregation around you was something that I thought was far more difficult, and we had to address it with a lot of nuance. As I said, bringing in individuals to record different parts of the service. There was also, normally there would be both the professional choir and a community choir. So the community choir did a few collaborative recordings to try and bring that element, back into the service. And I would say that the one missing element that's already been acknowledged here was being able to sit next to the person and argue over whose seat is whose. And I think, forgive me for not remembering who, but one of my colleagues mentioned, playing with your fathered seat. That's an intangible that I connected with immediately when you said it. And I think some of that was still missing. I will say, though, that I think the congregation reacted incredibly well. They really felt like they were a part of their high holiday services. The reviews of it were incredibly positive. I know that it in some ways renewed some individuals' commitment to the synagogue, that they were seeing that not only were services being made that were focused on connecting to the congregant, but that it was thinking about how to pull we were spending so much time thinking about how to pull the community together. And I would say that in terms of a pre-recorded service, and I realize that there's lots of disagreement on the efficacy of doing something fully pre-recorded, and it wasn't full. There were moments of live, but it interspersed and largely pre-recorded. I would say that for pre-recorded, that we started to set the gold standard. I was very, very proud of what came together. And I should say also that just to round things out a little bit, what we also did was offered several services, Nila, for instance, being a service that you had to, that was only open to congregants. So most of the services were available fully live streamed, but there were a few moments that they decided this is for our congregation. And I think that those were, that those were great decisions. So I might be in the minority when I say that while I hope that we can have live services and very soon, if we, hopefully we have a vaccine soon and we can safely daven together. But I certainly don't see this going away, because it has reinforced engagement in individuals that might not otherwise be engaged in a service at all.
Very interesting. Thank you. So that your experience there in Los Angeles, interesting to hear. And as you say, you've kind of broken new ground with pre-recorded services and all the tech that surrounded that. Thank you very much for that. We may come back to some of those points when we come to the questions. I do want to move now to Stuttgart and to Nathan Goldman, Cantor Nathan Goldman, who is at home rather than in the shul, I think. But Nathan, how was it for you?
Well, first of all, it's lovely to be here. I am not, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm not a speaker like all of those guys are. They aren't they fantastic speakers? They're so educated and, they say words I didn't even know existed. But I'm not one of those. I'm not such a. I'm not. I can't give you an academic analysis of what happened. I can tell you a little bit about Yom Kippur. We davened Yom Kippur in a rented hall in a theatre, and we had about 300 people. And I thought to myself, I don't want to daven in a theatre. You know, it's God knows what's been in a German theatre, what sort of things have been on the stage, what's been, I don't know. But so I was a bit apprehensive about that. That's a good word, apprehensive, but never mind. So, but I'll tell you, at one moment, I thought to myself, you know what? God's glory is everywhere. So I'll tell you about one moment in the Avoda. By the way, we didn't skip anything. We skipped Pesukei de Zimra. I don't know why that made a difference, but it did. Somehow we managed to finish Yom Kippur davening at, I think it was around 1:30 even. We didn't skip anything except for Pesukei de Zimra, which maybe I don't know how we did it. And I obviously the difference this year was that I had to do Shacharis, Musaf, Mincha, Nila. I did it all, and thank God I finished it. In fact, I had more time for Nila, so I was able to sing pieces which I'd never sang in previous year. We had 2 hours for Nila because our break wasn't as big as usual, and I sang Atono Sing Yod from Rappaport. I had plenty of time to sing whatever I wanted. I'll just tell you about one moment during the Avoda. Maybe I should speak slower, but I'll just tell you, when I was going, Vakoanim ha-homedim bazorok shayu shomeim es Hashem, and I went right down on this stage in the middle of some Goyish theatre in the middle of South Germany, and I thought to myself, you know what? It's all right. It was, and I got back up, and it was just, it was okay. I felt at home there okay during the end of the service because we spent a long time there. But as I said to you previously, it was an interesting experience because it wasn't davening in the shul, which we're all used to as chazonim. Our voices are part of that building, whether we like it or not. We are part of that scenery there, and to go to another place, it's different. And another thing that I can tell you which happened was that my new son had a bris on that day on Yom Kippur. So can you imagine how busy it was? I had to do, I had Kol Nidre and I had Shacharis, I had Musaf, then I had to go and do a bris. I wasn't the moil, but we had a moil that came from Switzerland, and I had to look after him, and we brought him back to the shul, and we had more people in the shul for the bris. It was so funny. We went to another place for the service because of corona restrictions. We needed more space in between everyone. Yet we came back to the shul, and we had about 200 people in the shul. I don't understand why we couldn't have done the service there too, but we didn't. But we had like the bris, and yes, it was a very interesting experience. What was the other question?
Well, one of the other questions is how. I mean, very interesting. I'm interested to listen to your experiences. But one of the, I'm going to come back to one thing in a minute. But one of the other questions was, how do you think, if at all, this has amended the fortunes for the Cantor, either permanent or high holy days, into the future?
I have to tell you two things. In the Orthodox world, right, the Chazonus was in a disastrous state before the corona started. Meaning that, I'm sorry to sound bad, but there were no full-time chazonim. How many full-time chazonim in England? I don't want to get into that, but with regards to corona making a difference, every bad thing comes to an end. We knew that during the war. We had the same sort of terrible thing. I wasn't around, obviously, but I know that during the war, we had abridged services and it was different. I don't believe that I think it will come to an end, and we have to keep optimistic. People like to come to shul, but with it making a difference to the Chazan's job. I think the Chazan's job in the UK and in Europe, it's in Germany, it's a bit different because the Chazan is also the Balkore and does a lot of things. And you yourself, Russell, Mr. Grossman, you're a fantastic. You could work for the radio, and you're a fantastic Balkore. And as I said, the Chazan here in Germany is also the Balkore. Maybe that could help if a Chazan were to really take it upon himself to become a Balkore. Maybe that would help the situation in the UK. But with regards to COVID making a difference to the situation, I don't think it will. Yes, people enjoy sitting at home as a service. It's much easier, but I'm sure people would. I'm sure I don't think shuls necessarily would carry on. I hope not with such a way, to have a service on Zoom rather than having it in the real, to have it in the in the Orthodox world you can't, can you? You can't do a service on Zoom on a Shabbos morning, in the Reform world maybe you can, but as I said, one of the things that I learned, and I said it before on the last meeting that I was involved in, that it's important for a chazan to have beautiful nusach. If he wants the service to finish quickly, which it did in my case, and I didn't rush, I sang very posh at nusach, something like, and I've said Kachko, Bear's Book, something very beautiful, very posh, and gets it forward. You don't necessarily have to spend, you still have to have very good nusach, very professional nusach, better than the average Joe, but it's still got to be good. And I think that's where Bear's Book and Catchco can help you out. I don't think that has anything to do with what you said to me, but that's what I feel.
Thank you very much. We've got a diversity of speakers here, and that's exactly what we wanted, and you've certainly helped with that. Nathan, the question I was going to ask you was why did you end up doing Mincha, Shachris, Musaf, Mariv, Ne'ilah, and possibly not necessarily in that order?
Yeah, because the person who started Mincha, I said to myself, I can't let him do that. I walked up, I said, I'll have Mincha, I need to warm up for Ne'ilah. I needed a break, but I said to him, just let me do. I couldn't listen to it. Maybe I shouldn't say this. I won't say who it was, but I said, because my uncle was a real Baal Nusach. He knew Nusach very well, and he was an expert in these things that nobody knows the Nusach for. Nobody knows what's the Kaddish for. I said it already. What's the Kaddish for Chazor Sashatz? Yiskada, Halvi Yiskada, Shemei Rabot, so forth, from Bear's Book. And I said, I know it, I'll do it. The funny thing is that a few days before Mincha, a few days before Yom Kippur, somebody called me up and said, how do you do Mincha on Yom Kippur? And I said, I don't know, let's look in Bear's Book. So I inadvertently, that's a good word, taught him and taught myself too. And thank God I was ready to daven Mincha. But Baruch Hashem, I finished quickly, and my voice, Baruch Hashem, I had no problems, and I can just say thank you to Hashem and to my wife and to my mother and my parents, that they all were giving me good advice at the time. And as I said, the only best advice that I can give a chazan in the 21st century is to become a balkore, so you can be employable, and to make yourself your nusach beautiful, better than the average person, but also at the same time more posh. And I think you can only get that from Bear's Book. Again, that had nothing to do. I think I answered your question first, and then I went into.
Thank you. That has certainly increased shares in the Bear Publishing Company over the last 15 minutes. So thank you very much for that, and recognizing Rabbi David Katanka, your uncle, of blessed memory. Thank you very much indeed for that, Nathan. We're going to move now to Cantor Debbie Catchco-Gray, who is in Connecticut. I think I'm correct in saying that. Again, if you will introduce yourself, not that you need a lot of introduction, but if you will introduce yourself, and I'll just put the questions on the screen for those who may have joined recently.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be back with you. I can either watch The Crown or I can listen to these cantors speak in the most beautiful English accent. It's absolutely a pleasure. I had a very, start your video. Okay, I thought I was started. How am I doing now? There, I see Nathan and, am I on? There we go. Okay. I had a very unusual situation. My rabbi wanted me to have a very high quality audio sound, and he was concerned that even if I was in the sanctuary with social distancing and only a handful of people, that the recording sound wouldn't be excellent. And so he encouraged me to go into a recording studio, and over 2 days I recorded 52 pieces of music. One day Rosh Hashanah, the next day Yom Kippur. That's when the studio had time. And I was going to sit home and watch myself daven and offer music during the high holidays, which is completely different experience than I've ever had. I've been doing the high holidays for 41 years, and it was unbelievable. But there were some amazing moments. I felt that it brought our congregation together in ways that have never been. People from all over the country and even different parts of the world were able to be part of our service, be part of our worship. And because we didn't do such high-tech live streaming, we did Zoom with the safety precautions. We were able to see our congregation in an immediate way. And for instance, during Yivarechecha, they would pan different families and you'd see beautiful families sitting together. I think it brought us closer in a way. We had an interesting moment where, I'm watching myself, which was, nobody likes to listen to themselves, but I got over it, and, I was actually able to pray in a different way without worrying about being on. I was able to be, on and off at the same time. And that was very special, except when it came to a Kedusha, and it was the Lewandowski Kedusha, they couldn't find the track. So I had to go out of my haze, and the rabbi said, Cantor, can you just step in? And there it was. And I remember my cousin, Poldy, Alav Shalom, he was wonderful. He used to say, daven, you have a seat, or you just daven, you don't even need music, just do it. So it was so much fun. I just had to do like a pop-up and do that. The Lewandowski Kedusha, boom. If I hadn't done it for, the last 20 years, it would have been a problem, but it was no problem. One of the really incredible moments for me was for Kol Nidre. We had a cellist, a little shortened cello. I've told him to shorten that bracha, it's a little long. And then I've always wanted to play the recording of my father singing Kol Nidre, because most of my congregation, and I'm there 21 years, it's a small Reform congregation, about 300 families, they haven't heard my father sing unless they've listened to a few recordings. So, and I always thought, I'll look lazy if I just sit on the bima and press a button and, listen to my father do a Kol Nidre. But because of this opportunity to be creative and do different things, I made that second Kol Nidre, which is always the Kachka one that I do. I had my father sing. And it's a good thing that I pre-recorded the third Kol Nidre, because I started sobbing and weeping. I got a little hysterical when I heard the first chords of the organ, which was my mother of blessed memory. And then my father started singing. I get a little teary right now. It was so moving. I felt like my parents were with me, and everybody could hear my father, who had the voice of a prophet, is what his father said to him. It was so powerful. And people said that it was the most incredible Kol Nidre they've ever heard in their life. And what I did was, like Natalie Cole, I went into the studio after my father had passed, and I added harmony. So it's a Kol Nidre with harmony, generations apart, years apart. Very, very, very special. In terms of what was a loser part, I really felt it was mostly winning. I missed my choir, obviously, but since March, I have been doing all my services on Zoom. We have an interesting situation. My rabbi's in this sanctuary and I'm on Zoom. He's young and fearless. I'm 63 and I could get asthma, if you, breathe on me and you have a cold. So we've been very careful. And it's interesting because he likes me to, he actually wants me to stay on Zoom. He says he misses me on the Bema. Now I wonder, but he says it's good because it validates the congregation that's watching from Zoom that the cantor can be on Zoom and it can be authentic and it's a real service, and he can be in the sanctuary with a mask and, you know, a handful of people. Another thing we chose to do with videos, a lot of congregations went huge with high tech. I remember speaking with him about, you know, the production of some other synagogues, and we realized it, like a light bulb went off, and I said, you know what? If we play the music and we just have the text, that's really what it's all about. It's about the text. It's not about the production. It's not a Hollywood movie. And so I'm glad we had low tech. I'm glad we had a low budget. I'm glad we made the most of a little and made it important. Now, when we talk about the future, and then I would like to show a little clip of me singing in the studio, which was a very different experience. When we talk about the future, I think it's important for cantors to be relevant, to have relationships with people as much as we can, even on Zoom. And there are ways to engage our congregation. For instance, our federation offers a wonderful author program where you can have an author come and talk about their book. It's free. And normally we'd pay transportation and lunch, but guess what? With Zoom, there's no transportation and there's no lunch. So, you know, you can send a little honorarium, but you can get wonderful speakers. And I've been doing something called a prayer-a-thon, which my friend Kathy Sebo gave me the idea of the name, where after a shorter Friday night service, I'll do 5 or 6 versions. I called an Oseh Shalom-a-thon, a V'Shamru-a-thon, Hallelujah-a-thon, a Don Olam-a-thon. And then you put up a poll and people can vote, you know, love it, like it, meh, or it's okay if I never hear this again. And I get feedback, and it's wonderful to find out what the congregation really likes. And I told them at the end of the year, I'm going to do a service of all the #1 hits and the #2 hits. So you can get feedback and, you know, make people feel like they're part of the process. I thought I would finish with a little clip of a video. It's Adoshem, Adoshem, which is normally chanted 3 times. And I decided I would do a hybrid since everything can be different and change. I did a traditional version one time, and then I did Leon Scher's beautiful kind of folk contemporary version, very guitar oriented. And just to note that our horn player has played with Billy Joel on Broadway. Mark Feinberg is unbelievably fantastic. So when you hear him and you say, wow, that sounds like a Billy Joel album, well, that's because he's that good. So maybe we could play a little bit of this, and you can see me singing in a recording studio in Stamford, Connecticut, where Paul Simon and Beyonce and Diana Ross, and there was a lot of good vibes in that room. And there it is.
Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, Erech Apayim, V'Rav Chesed V'Yemet, Notzer Chesed La'alafim, Nase Yavon Navafesha, V'Chata V'Nakeh, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, Adonai, Adonai,
just say that because there were 52 pieces of music in 2 days, all the musicians knew one take. You got one take, whatever it is, we're going with it. Because if we were in shul, we wouldn't say, oh, I can do that better. Let me just do it one more time. This is it. And I was focused on the text. It wasn't, I wasn't looking in the camera and trying to make it a, theatrical thing. It was prayer, but we recorded it. So thank you so much for including me. I love getting to see all of you, and I love to hear the crown in action here. And on this side of the pond, it's still very thrilling. My grandmother was from East End, London, and I just love to hear the sounds. So thank you for bringing that home.
That's great, Debbie. Thank you very much, and we look forward to having you in London at some time in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The last person we're going to is Jeremiah Lockwood. Jeremiah, I think you may have been a little bit later joining us. So just to say that we are looking at for some specific questions that we want to have a look at here, which are was it a meaningful experience? Was it what was the biggest winner and biggest loser for you this year, and what are the implications for the employment of full-time high holiday cantors in the future, plus anything else that you might want to take from that pick list up to 16 in the next few minutes. And please do introduce yourself.
Hello, thank you so much, Russell, for reintroducing the questions. And I did indeed come a bit late today. My apologies. I was detained with another obligation, but I got to hear Cantors Goldman and Kachko Gray speak, and it's wonderful to hear about how people across the Jewish music community, the liturgical community, are embracing both the painful reality and the possibilities. I see I'm not quite loud enough. Can you hear me a little better now?
Yeah.
Okay. So this year I was leading services at Congregation Beth Shalom in San Francisco, where I've been affiliated with the synagogue for the past 2 years as a music director, leading a monthly special concert music-oriented Friday night service with different guest artists each month. That's a kind of a concert series at the synagogue, but a sacred concert series geared towards cultivating a culture in the community of sacred listening, with an eye towards the tradition of the cantor as a figure in Jewish life who is an arbiter of sacred aesthetics. And so by playing with how to contextualize this kind of figure in a way which will be legible to the specific needs and aesthetic perspective of the people in the congregation, and my own impulses musically. I bring artists who I think are wonderful and have something to offer that will bridge the gap between the heavily well-developed aesthetic sense of many people in the San Francisco Jewish community, but from my perspective, the underdeveloped appreciation of Jewish musical aesthetics. And that idea is continued in the high holiday services that I lead, where I create my own arrangements of elements of classic recorded chazonos from the Golden Age recorded period, or elements of Nusach that I studied with my grandfather, who was Jacob Konigsberg of blessed memory, who was a great cantor, and also bringing in guest artists who represent other musical perspectives and genres. And we did that this year as well, under the changed circumstances. So the Rabbi Beth Shalom, who's a dear friend of mine, Rabbi Dan Ain, I would say he's been in an ongoing state of self-probing, wanting to figure out how best to use technology to engage the congregation, while at the same time he's resistant to the idea of live streaming on Shabbos. And on Yom Tov as well. And so the compromise that we came up with was to pre-record all of the services. And it's a massive synagogue. They had multiple offerings going on at the same time, family, quote unquote, traditional services, as well as the music-oriented services that I lead. And so all of those were pre-recorded, and so we had one something a bit like what Cantor Debbie was mentioning just now. We had an epic day of filming all of the services, and they were posted on YouTube on the congregation's YouTube channel, and were, you know, the links were sent out to the congregants, and people were able to view the services from their homes. We were trying to create as a deeply felt a musical and liturgical prayer experience as possible under the impoverished circumstances of not being able to be together in person. And the extent to which we were successful is hard to ascertain. I mean, you know, people in the congregation appreciated it a lot, and it helped keep the sense of the community going. It was, from my perspective, I was able to continue my presence in the congregation as a music director, a force advocating for music in the synagogue and for Jewish liturgical traditions as being something that is important to the continuing nature of the community. I'm on the fence about the compromise. I mean, it was what we were able to do, what we could achieve under the circumstances. God willing, it's a one-time experience. You know, I mean, some synagogues have really embraced the Facebook Live approach, and Congregation Beth Shalom has not. Right? I think that in part this is because Rabbi Ain's ministry, so to speak, is very heavily focused on getting people to digital detox, right? That people should be engaged in real life experiences and should be weaning themselves from the dependence on digital technology, which is an incredibly omnipresent feature of modern life for all of us, but especially in the Bay Area, where we're in kind of belly of the beast, so to speak, of people being plugged in. And that makes it very difficult for him to be able to really fully embrace the Facebook Live experience, which has been incredibly powerful for other communities in terms of connecting to new congregants. So I respect Ryan's opinion. He's trying to be consistent, you know, but it's difficult, I would say. You know, at the other community that I'm involved with for High Holidays is a kind of a not brick and mortar community called Because Jewish in New York that Rabbi Ain founded, but is now continued by some of the leaders in that community now that he and I are in San Francisco, and they are performing the services using my music, my liturgical compositions, and comparing the reach that they had broadcasting on Facebook with the reach that we had only really reaching out to our own networks through the synagogue's YouTube channels. The service in Brooklyn reached, you know, in the tens of thousands, and ours a much more limited audience. So that's a kind of a frustration, but also just perhaps it's also because we are really invested in the idea that we're going to go back to the in-person experience as soon as possible. But we'll see. We'll see how that transpires. I'm not sure that I have anything else to say at this moment about the experience, other than that, it's there's on a personal level the omnipresence of different cantors around the world broadcasting their services has been quite wonderful in a way. I mean, it's tragic, and there's a melancholy about the isolation of experiencing prayer through the synagogue, through the computer. But at the same time, from an ethnographic perspective, I've been in a kind of a frenzy of computer ethnography, of digital ethnography in the past months, of being able to connect with liturgical experiences around the world, which has been quite interesting, quite fecund for me as a scholar of Jewish music, and I'm hoping to write about it at some point in the future. And it was great getting to hear a little bit about some of the responses and the experiences, and for instance. Cantor Gray's story about this mundane collaboration across the generations that the digital experience facilitated. I mean, how wonderful is that? How rich! I think there's so much to think about and to say about that story. So I'm trying to embrace the fragments, the shards of beauty and holiness that are still able to ascertain in this moment.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I love that last bit about your comment about the ethnography of digital Jewish music. And I think one of the things that this experience over High Holidays has given us is it's given us all a window into everybody else's music in a way that normally we would never have the opportunity to do so. And I followed some services that have been recorded. I followed them after Yom Tov, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I'll do that one next year, etc. And excuse me. We've not had that opportunity before, so if there's something that's good that's come out of this, I think that's been it. And we've heard from 8 very different, very diverse experiences, which is, of course, what we wanted to achieve. And we heard from Cantor Benny Rogozninsky at the start, who was explaining it was a very different but slightly melancholy experience. We've been through the highs and lows of things that have been absolutely to celebrate. Albi Chait talking about the number of people that he'd brought in, Nathan Goldman, Cantor Nathan, explaining that he'd had the opportunity to daven the entire 25-hour Yom Kippur service by himself, and then finishing off with Jeremiah coming back to a little bit of the melancholy. So it feels like we've been all the way around the houses. And I'm going to turn now to Alex Klein. Alex needs absolutely no introduction, but I'm going to ask him just to introduce himself for 15 seconds before then going on to do a bit of a wrap on what you've heard today, Alex. After you've pressed the unmute button.
Hi everybody, and thank you so much for making this a most interesting and wonderful session. Most people know me. Those who don't, my background is I'm not a cousin, but I can be. I'm well versed in Tefillah and various different things appertaining to do with Kazonis and davening. And I started taking services at the age of 7 or 8, and I had wonderful teachers. My brother was a chazan and a rabbi, and we used to sing together at home with my parents and family and one thing and another. So yes, I'm quite steeped in that knowledge. What I've learned from this experience is that over the High Holidays and the various different festivals that we have, shuls cannot do without having a chazan, especially in the time of Zoom, because if you don't have a professional who is able to take a Zoom service as it should be, it's a waste of time. You get nothing from it and you go nowhere with it. What I also found out through many phone calls, people phoned me and thought I was a miracle man, because at the last minute, can you find me a chazan? Can you find me a chazan? I need a chazan. I got 3 services going on at once in my shul because of the COVID virus, and I have no one to take it. Again, it reiterates the fact that chazanim have an opportunity now of trying to cement themselves within the congregations and the shuls, and they are so needed today. Most of them that I know have gone beyond what they should do, especially the part-time ones and those that are only have jobs for Yomim Narayim. They're not worried about money, they're not worried about what they're going to get, but they're worried more about what they can give to the congregations to still continue to speak to their old friends, you know, because on him every year I've gone to the same shul, they've crossed continents, they've flown to one shul or another, and sometimes this has not been possible. But through Zoom, I know some of my Chazonisha friends have zoomed into their congregations and say, I'm sorry, I cannot be with you because of the virus, I'm not allowed to travel, but let's get together and sing together the songs that we usually sing for Rosh Hashanah, for Yom Kippur. And this has been remarkable. They didn't have to do it. And this appeared so many times. Explanation services run by Chazonim, concerts for songs for Yom Noraim, special Yisro services. Without the Chazonim, this would never ever take place. And I'm hoping this is not just a short fix, that once COVID is over, we'll go back to reverting to that we don't need and we don't want Chazon anymore. Take Chazonim out of the equation. You wouldn't have what you did. Zoom, especially Zoom, and I have to reiterate the fact, and Chazonim who have appeared on Zoom will verify the fact that if you're not professional, you don't know the Nusach, you don't understand the prayer, it is impossible for you to do a service on Zoom. Those are the things I've learned. More people went to shul than I've ever seen, because they have the opportunity of visiting shuls out of their neighborhoods, out of country, and pick and choose through TV channels and through other media to be able to do this. Hamptons, for example, Nathaniel Hustic and Heimoff and his choir, 200,000 hits for pre-recorded services, and it's a weekly thing. As Schwartz has it in New York, Dan Mutlu, Magda Fishman, Regal Pro, all these people have done wonderful jobs. I've met wonderful people, and I thank you for this. And please let all of us be together as one. It doesn't matter what denomination, what shul you daven, whether you Reform, Egalitarian, Conservative, Orthodox, we all are doing the same job, praying on behalf of our congregations to God to make sure that we are blessed and we have blessings for our future. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you very much. And thank you to all our contributors today. Now, we have 13 minutes precisely for a general dialogue before we need to begin to think about wrapping. And I can see that Rabbi Michael Dushinsky, who is in Prague. Rabbi Michael, you've asked if you can make a contribution as we go into the more open dialogue. And you need to come off. You need to come off mute.
Okay, can you hear me now? Shalom. My name is Rabbi Michael Dushinsky. I'm Chazan since I was born. I even studied a crash course in the Naftali school, but also 60 years ago in Ravitz school in Tel Aviv. And now I was rabbi for many years, but always also Chazan, and teaching the Nusach and carrying the Nusach of my family, my yeshivas, and what I studied in wherever I davened all my life. So now I'm living in Prague for the last in Czech Republic, 22 years, and I've been Cantor every year in different communities in the world. Recently, in the last 11, 12 years, except this year, I was Chazan in Spain, in the Ashkenazi Minyan within the Moroccan community in Marbella, Andalusia. But this year, of course, I couldn't get there. So in the last moment, I was asked to be Chazan here. Because of the situation here in Prague, I will tell you, I will share with you how it was. In most of the country, what we call the small country communities, there was no minyan at all, or maybe something on the Zoom. And the conservative people, of course, did everything only on the Zoom. But here it was a bit open on Rosh Hashanah. We were allowed, and on Yom Kippur, and even on Sukkot, we were allowed to do this with the restrictions, the services. So I was appointed, like in the last moment, to be the Chazan here. Sometime I didn't have minyan, like the first night of Rosh Hashanah, I had, and the first night of Sukkot, and the second night of Rosh Hashanah, we didn't even try. But during the day, I had to do Shachis and Musaf. I have my Nusach also on the internet, but I'm not going to sing you. But I can sing you something because I love to sing, so I will sing you what I did for you can also hear it in the chat. I did Venislach according to an old Chazan which I learned from his record, and once we gave a lecture on these records in our conference in London. Venislach lechol adat b'nei Yisrael v'oger agar b'saycham ki lechol ha'om b'shegogo v'niselach lechol adas b'nei Yisrael v'lager hagar b'soichom ki lechol ha'om b'shegogo. And the third time repeats the first time when he selach, etc., etc. That's what I did.
I do it like that. It's very nice.
And I had to do all the prayers, Shachis, Musaf, either in the Altneu Shul, which many of you know from visiting in Prague, and in the Jerusalemska synagogue where I live. I live for many years here in this flat, which is in the roof of the Jerusalem synagogue. So in fact, I am the golem of Prague, but that's another thing. I just want to finish that also during Sukkot, I had to do everything. I had to schlep with me, before Shabbos, for Shmini Atzeres, the kittel, to bring it before for the Geshem, and all these things I had to do by myself, and sometimes with really exactly 10 men, because we are Orthodox running here, and it was very, very, very unusual experience for me to do all these things. But Baruch Hashem, we had minyanim. The special thing which was this year, and that's something which I shared with you, just send it on the chat. Please look at it. There was, because so many people were afraid to come also to the synagogue, and old people who cannot come to the Yizkor, and this is usually the people who are coming, first night of Rosh Hashanah. This is full here, sometimes 200 or 300 people, which is very full to such a small community after Holocaust, after communism, and not so frum. So only people come for the first night Rosh Hashanah and the first night of Yom Kippur, called Nitre. This year there were 20, 25, 30 people, not more, men and women together. We made mechitze in the middle of the synagogue. So they were sitting in both sides. And they come for Yizkor, but we knew that for Yizkor there might be not even a minyan. Baruch Hashem, in the end there was a minyan on Yom Kippur in both synagogues for Musaf. No, but mamash by miracles. But the rabbi suggested, our Orthodox rabbi suggested, to make a beautiful thing, and we did it before. I had to fast another half an hour, and you can see the 19-20 minutes of the thing which we did in the bima of the Jerusalem synagogue, in which I made Kol Nidrei 3 times, according to Halacha. It must be before Shkia. before sunset, and then I made also a special yizkor for the Shoah, and this Venislach and Shehecheyanu, and then we stopped the Zoom and we continued with the Ma'ariv with whomever was still staying there for the tefillah. But in this,
Doshi, I'm going to have to ask you to stop there just because
Yeah.
we've only got 7 minutes left, and you'll appreciate that. But thank you for that contribution, and actually I sing that Venislach as well. It's very nice indeed. I'm going to ask in the time that we've got left if there are other questions or contributions that people would like to make, and you can either make them in the chat or, of course, you could voice them. So I'm just going to pause for a second, see if anybody wishes to come in at this point.
thank you, Russell.
You're welcome. Thank you. I want to ask a question. One of the things that, in fact, Dushi mentioned there was congregants that might be frightened or afraid to come to the synagogue, and therefore Yizkor, for example. One of the things that I've certainly noticed, and actually not just Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, well, not Rosh Hashanah at all, actually, but Yom Kippur certainly, that Yizkor has been done outside before Yom Tov in the Orthodox synagogues, and has been an experience that perhaps has been quite unusual for people. I wondered if anybody wished to comment on that, or that is if that's your experience, that's something that might continue, in fact, beyond COVID.
I would like just to say that idea, I would do it next year and all the years to come, because some people, old people and other people don't come. Orthodox synagogue, it was working so beautifully. By the way, the father of our chief rabbi is the organist. You heard him in the concert. And he made, not this year, because this year there was no time, because we had to do it in very restricted time. He is doing before the Kol Nidre, on the organ in that synagogue in Jerusalemska, which is like a very traditional to our traditions here. And he's doing the Kol Nidre plus other 2 or 3 pieces, and then we start the normal Kol Nidre every recent years. And I think that, and then the idea to put the Yizkor after the Kol Nidre before Borchu, it is a fantastic idea, and you can Zoom it for the whole community. It's already, you are in the atmosphere after the Kol Nidre of the Yom Tov, so why not doing Yizkor? There is no any issue, any prohibition to do it.
Okay, so thank you for that. So,
Dushi, can I ask you a question? Can I ask Dushi a quick question?
Alex, I just wanted to voice a couple of things that are in the chat here. Evan Cohen saying the most frightened individual over the holidays was his cat when he's blew shofar in his living room over Zoom at the conclusion. Ela, thank you very much for that. And also I've seen in the chat also one or two comments relating to timings of the services. So again, thank you for those. So Alex, you've got 3 minutes for you and Dushi to have a conversation.
Dushi, there are quite a few shuls in your community, the Altman shul, the Jerusalem shul, the one where we had the concert. Were all the shuls used for
very
services
short.
over the island?
No. Only 2 synagogues are active during the whole year and on Yom Tov, on Shabbatot and Yom Tov, and this is the Altnoi and the Jerusalem. The Spanish synagogue is closed now for a long time, just after what we did 2 years ago. But that's just a practical question. 2 synagogues of the Jewish community of Prague. There are other synagogues which are used for other small communities, like but it's not important now. But the main community of Prague is using this synagogue. Yeah, the conservative and another group and the Reform are using other halls or sometimes other synagogues within Prague.
Well done, the two of you.
Were any of your students able to help you out with the davening and the laning?
Very nice question. And again, I think this is more for Chazanut conference. Oh, I see Daniel Katz. I see some of our visitors here. Thank you for coming, Yo-Yo, and others. And it's very good to meet you again after such a long time, Charles. Yeah, I see. Anyway, so what? Some of the ladies did not come to our conferences. David Prager, Shalom Aleichem, Daniel, I see, okay.
Aleichem Shalom.
To say Aleichem Shalom, that's to say that I'm very happy that I joined this in the last half hour. I was outside. But I want to tell you that in our small community, this year, I want to really thank God and thank the management of the rabbinate, Leo and others, and the rabbi, Rabbi Sidon was on Rosh Hashanah, he could still, from the eve of Rosh Hashanah, Rav Sidon had corona. Yom Kippur, he was in a very bad condition. Baruch Hashem, he is back. Rav David Peter, the chief rabbi, also had corona. I had to do also that kiot. I sent you that kiot. There is a kiot which I'm doing outside the synagogue. This is recorded, photoed on Yontef by my Goyish friend who was there, and he was doing it without my knowledge, and I was blowing the shofar for people who came late. There were 2 or 3 blowings of the shofar because people did not want to come together. So there was one at 11, one at 12, and those who came a little bit late, I had to do it for them outside, so he photoed it. So this is some of the experience of this year.
Okay, thank you, Dushi. Thank you, Alex.
Outside for the people.
Thank you to Dushi and to Alex.
Russell, we haven't asked you about your experience in Glasgow in Scotland.
I did briefly talk about it. I did briefly talk about it at the start, actually, and it was very similar to the combination of experiences that we've had here. Overall, I would say it was an experience that was fine to have 1 year, but I wouldn't like to repeat it again. Not least because we normally have a congregation of 600 to 700, and we can only have 50 people in the synagogue at any one time. So actually, quite a few people were not able to come, even though the demand was there. We actually had to ration out the services. So somebody could come for Maariv, somebody could come for Shachar, somebody could come for Musaf, and so on. We did in parallel run services for Ne'ilah on Kol Nidre. I took one, Rabbi took the other, and the same with Musaf. But we were limited to no service being more than 2 hours on Yom Kippur, Musaf, which is normally 3.5 hours. And for the rest of the services, we were restricted to literally 45 minutes to an hour. And if we were running the services consecutively, then had to leave half an hour to vacate and if you like, defumigate the shul. So yes, it was fine for 1 year as an experience. I don't think I'd like to go there again. We have come up to time. I'm just going to say that the thing that for me that has been most wonderful, in addition to the fact obviously that we've had contributors that have been very diverse and really have gone around the houses in a very comprehensive mix of experiences, is we've also been to Stuttgart, London, Prague, San Francisco, LA, Connecticut, Leeds, New York, Miami, Frankfurt, and even Manchester, Alex. So thank you very much to all of you that have taken part. I'm going to hand over now, I think, to Mark Kligman to tell us what's coming up next.
And a big thanks to everyone who participated today, and to literally be around the globe with all of these programs is truly a special aspect for us of these very unusual times, and really appreciate this very thoughtful conversation. I think this conversation has just gotten started, and I hope that we can find ways to continue. And a really big thanks to Russell for being such a wonderful facilitator and host with wonderful efficiency and commentary, and we're very grateful. So our next upcoming programs go as follows. Next week on December 1st, we'll be joined by Cantor Rabbi Dr. Daniel Katz and Dr. Boaz Tarsi to look at synagogue music before Zolzer. The week following that, Dr. Jeff Janesco will interview David Amram, who will be celebrating his 90th birthday this week. David Amram is a noted composer. He worked with Leonard Bernstein, other notable individuals, and a variety of idioms, both classical, jazz, and also liturgical music. After that, we'll have a program with Agnes Corey and David Flig, which will be on musicians in Hungary and the impact of Nazism and the challenges of reevaluation and rehabilitation. And our last one for the 2020 calendar year will be a composer in focus with Michael Shapiro with Elliot Forrest. So we have 4 wonderful programs upcoming in December. We hope that you can join us. We're so glad you were able to join us today. Please share this with your colleagues. We're always curious to know your ideas of these programs, What other programs that you'd like? There are many wonderful things going on all over the world in Jewish music, and we endeavor to try and keep everyone connected and to communicate these other activities. And I just want to personally thank our benevolent overlord, Geraldine Auerbach, who really does such an outstanding job of keeping everything going. So big thanks to Geraldine, and we thank you all.
Can I also wish Mazel Tov while we're on the phone to David and Jill Prager of becoming grandparents to a baby girl in Israel. So Mazel Tov and great news, and wonderful to share Simchot, even though it's on Zoom.
Mazel Tov.